Hello. This is Sheri from the Sheri Kaye Hoff Show, where we focus on living joyfully in your life and business. You can reach us at sherikayhoff.com. That's SherikayEhoff.com. I have a brilliant guest with me here today. I'm so excited to tell you about her. LaToya Toller is a licensed clinical mental health counselor and national certified counselor. She has worked in mental health, supporting clients towards healing, wellness, and becoming their personal best over the past 21 years. She is the owner of Mindful Home Interiors, PLLC, a holistic wellness company based in North Carolina, providing mental health counseling and home decor services that nourish and heal. LaToya focuses on providing care to clients experiencing significant life adjustments and loss. Her services address grief, relationship issues, depression, anxiety, trauma, parenting, and child welfare, care provider or caregiver needs, mindfulness, and becoming whole. LaToya is the co-founder with her husband, also a mental health professional, of Aiden's Angels, Inc., a 501c3 nonprofit that serves children and their families experiencing transition and adjustment at critical life stages. Welcome, LaToya. I'm so excited that you're here with me today. How are you?
Hi, Sheri. I'm doing well. Thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, well, you have so much to offer. And today we're going to be talking about dealing with loss and change and how to do that. So let's just kick it right off. I know that this is a time, in our country, in our world, where people are dealing with lots of loss and grief and change. So tell us how to do it. What's the best approach?
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the key things that we consider, first of all, is that loss is unique to each person. None of us do it in the same way. And really being able to identify what that means, how we interpret that, and how we live that is so very essential to being able to mark our path and move forward through it. So some areas that I would like to talk about are really being able to adjust to that change, allowing empathy for ourselves through it, being able to connect with people that are trusted supports for us, being able to identify and communicate our priorities, and establishing tools that really help us as we're walking along our path. Into really talking about the challenges that we face, I first want to address what is loss. I think traditionally we consider it to be just related to grief in terms of the loss or the death of a loved one, but it includes so many other experiences as well. It could be related to divorce. It could be related to empty nesting, adjusting to a disability or a chronic health condition, natural disasters, as you've mentioned, and we've had so many of lately. But even a job loss, retirement, something that may not traditionally be seen as a loss because in some ways it's bittersweet, can be a loss. It's upending our lives and requiring things to be different. So those are certainly things that we have to adjust for and consider how we interpret them and make room for them in our lives.
It's really interesting because, I've had big losses in my life. My brother died and my first husband died. So, I think I have that tendency to think that is the main loss that I experienced or people experience. But then I think that leads people to kind of deny the other losses. Like right before we jumped on the podcast, I talked about how my son was going back to college after having remote learning. And I made the comment to one of my friends yesterday, I haven't been myself. I've been kind of depressed. And she said to me, well, I'm really sad that you didn't reach out to me sooner. And I thought about how, I just dismissed it because it's just a normal part of life. And of course, I'm going to miss him. And of course, I'm going to be sad. But I wasn't really allowing myself the full space to look at how much it changes my life. Like, the daily conversations in person aren't there anymore. The daily shared jokes aren't there anymore. And so I love how you bring up how loss is a lot of things, not just the big ones. And if we don't give ourselves the space to deal with that, I think it builds up and it becomes, something else, maybe a prolonged depression or sadness or something like that. So what are some of the things that people can do? Like, how do you help people deal with loss, deal with change, deal with transition?
Absolutely. So I think a lot of people are probably familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in terms of stages of grief. That's a very popular one. And she was a well-known psychiatrist. And I think that one of the things that she talks us through are things like, denial, acceptance, bargaining, some of the main stages that you go through. One of the things I'd like to say is that not everybody goes through these stages, if at all. And if we go through them, they're not going to likely be in the same order. One of the things models that I like to use really compares grief and loss to an experience of a river where it's a really dynamic, active thing for each person, and it's ebbing and flowing all the time. Initially, we're at this point, which is kind of like a headway, the gateways to, what started us off in this experience or this loss. And then we go through this crisis period. And eventually we start to get to a place where things are normalized. But that doesn't come immediately. That takes a long time to get there. So some of the things that are really important to focus on are, you gave an example of your son earlier in terms of not being able to previously give yourself the space to think of that as a loss. And when you consider, even when we're given bereavement days of 2 to 3 days and are expected to be whole and well and able to return after that, really allowing yourself, again, the unique period of time it's going to take you by being able to pay attention to how you're functioning, whether that is on an emotional level, in terms of what am I thinking about? What am I feeling? What am I experiencing each day? Whether that's physically, how am I holding my body? What is the tension that I'm observing there? Am I struggling to get out of bed every day? What are the things that I'm doing? Am I throwing things at the wall in anger because I'm so frustrated? So really being able to pay attention to what has changed in your life following this loss. How am I receiving and responding to it? I think those are really essential pieces that will help us get started in terms of what is it that I need right now. And I think Western culture is one where we really diminish the value of a support system during periods of loss. I think there's so much value on independence that we forget the importance of needing other people to connect to when we are struggling. And we all struggle. It is not a unique to one person experience. So really being able to connect with those other people who can support us, who can guide us. Sometimes that can be family, but there are often those situations where we really need a professional who has the expertise and the training to help guide us through some of those difficult places that we are going to encounter when we struggle with grief and loss. And so really being able to, have a set of tools that we can utilize, again, recognizing what am I feeling, what's going on with me, what are the ways that I can receive help. Those are some of the things that initially come to mind.
Oh, that it's so much to unpack. And, I think, I lost my brother when he was 15 and I was 17. And when I look back on it, I was surrounded, because it was such a tragedy, I was surrounded by a lot of really incredible people, and I had a great therapist for 2 years. But when I look back on it, I feel Like I literally was in shock for about 7 years. Like it was almost like having the birth of my daughter is what blew me out of the shock of, I would still have I can't believe this happened in my life. I have a normal family. Why did this happen to me? But at the same time, I did thrive. Like I found, I didn't just say, I'm just going to give up and a lot of people would say, I don't know how you can go on. They would have understood if I became one of those statistics of someone who just never did anything because of such a terrible tragedy. But one of the things that I found, and you talked about support, is that there were some people that I swear they decided they were not going to let me flounder. And I had friends who came over and like dragged me to a concert and it was good for me. It's like they were like, I will not let you shut down. And so how can people be a support to people who they see are in grief, where they know when it's time, when it's time to be like compassionate and just listen, and when it's time to kind of do something that, it's almost like a slap, but not, I don't mean a slap, but like that shock of, oh yeah, there's a world out there.
I think that that's a great point, and I can so relate to that type of pain, Sheri. I lost my son at 3 days old, and I know you shared about your brother, and I think even knowing, the potential experiences that we could come face to face with, we can never be prepared for any of these experiences. And for me, even as a mental health provider, I was completely in shock, debilitated. Like you said, went through a period where it really felt like I was not functioning. I had a younger child as well at that time. And, really, I struggled. And at first, it felt like I can't ask for help because nobody's going to understand what I need. Nobody's going to be able to get inside my head. And one of the things that I recognized is that became very isolating, to just feel like I could manage it all inside my head, because eventually there's nowhere else to go. And I was fortunate to have the support of my in-laws, my mom, church members, people in the community that really looked out for us. We actually had the medical staff reaching out to us from the hospital, a lot of people in the community. And I think once I started to open up, we were connected to local support groups, a parenting grief group that was really beneficial for us to not feel isolated. My husband is also a mental health professional, I mentioned, and he grieved in a different way than I did. And so, speaks to really allowing people to be there for you. Again, if it's with their expertise, I had family members that would just drop off a tray of lasagna, or they would come in and take care of my daughter. And one of the things that I found to be helpful is when people at times stopped asking, well, what can I do? Because it was sometimes overwhelming to have to come up with a task for them. And sometimes there were opportunities for them to just do. And I found that, when I was able to have the freedom to say, do what you can do at this point, people would start, offering things, and I could say, okay, that's fine, versus me having to identify, I need this, because I just didn't have the headspace for it. Mm-hmm. So I did have a lot of people who were open to that, and just were willing to be available, again, whether that was for caregiving, whether that was just to sit with me, to hold my hand, to let me cry, to pray with me, whether that was to, again, provide a meal, help us connect to a support group, just allowing us to be where we needed to be in the moment to grieve. And that was really helpful to us.
I remember when I was younger and people would say, oh, there's a funeral, we're doing like meals for for people. I never understood that till I actually went through that. And so, for people out there who've never had something like that happen, and you think, well, how can a meal make a difference? Well, a meal is the last thing that you can even wrap your head around when you're grieving. And so having nutritional stuff on hand is a huge help for, for the family, because like you said, you don't have the headspace to be like, oh, even to order something to be delivered. It's like, you can't think, you can't focus. And so, sometimes it's like the simplest thing,
Yes.
yeah. And even like this summer, my husband had a pretty terrible injury, and I actually did have this headspace for a request. I sent a text out to my friends and said, do, any of you have anybody that could mow our lawn? And because I knew my husband would try to do it and he couldn't. And I thought, well, that's so stupid for me to ask that. Like within 5 minutes, my friend said, I'll send my husband over. And he came over and mowed the lawn. And my husband couldn't believe it. So it's like the unexpected things that you can do for people. And I think one thing we're getting at in this conversation is that grief is not just the person who's grieving. It's kind of like this concept of we are all one. And if you're not the person in the terrible grief, what you do does have a ripple effect. So I love this feeling of community and support that you're bringing forward. So I know you do some really specific things for people, and you're unique in that you have kind of a two-pronged approach, both, from the mental health side and from the creating supportive spaces for people. So how about if you tell us how that works?
Absolutely. So I've always been really fascinated about how much our environment impacts us. And environment is really about how we're living inside and outside of our head. And, sometimes inside of our head, we, either tend to it or don't. And the same, is our environment. And we all tend to function really well when things are in order. Or I'll speak for myself, but that's also been what has been shared to me by clients that I've worked with over the years, that when they have a plan, when they have structure, when things are working well, they can be at their best. And so my services include both mental health counseling and home decor services. The mental health counseling really helps to identify the need that the client has, and also create a plan for addressing that need. What do they want to see in their life? What does a positive change look like? How would that be represented? And so creating a plan for that, but also how is your wellness being supported in your home environment? How can we translate that as well? Do you have a place to rest? Do you have, maybe, prior to your loss or this experience, you had a particular space that you would, go to, and you don't feel like you can utilize that space anymore. How can we create meaning for you in that space? How can it be someplace that is soothing and tranquil and nourishing for you as you work through this process of healing? So really helping to bring in those elements, utilizing elements of nature. That's always an emphasis in my work, because nature heals, and really being able to utilize those elements, whether it's light or texture or, just the warmth of the environment, really being able to bring those things in to create something that is soothing for you and that is going to further you along, further all of us along in this process.
Mm, I just love the concept of working with both areas. So how can people get in touch with you?
Absolutely. My website is mindfulhomeinteriorsnc.com. And I can also be reached by email at mindfulhomeinteriors@gmail.com. And I look forward to speaking about ways that I can support your wellness. Thank you so much, Sheri.
Well, I really appreciate you being here today with us. So we've talked about some really deep concepts, and at any given time, there's probably just a massive percentage of the population that is grieving. What is the one or two things that you want people to leave this conversation with?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to allow yourself empathy. So often we, try to saddle ourselves with responsibilities of things that are beyond our control. And having self-compassion really can help us heal. Recognizing, again, the key support that is necessary, being able to identify the impact that can make, and really reaching out to gain that. Connecting with a mental health professional, spending some time to ask questions to identify, is this a good fit for me? Will this allow me to meet the goals that I have, for continuing in my life? So I think those are really important, to really being attentive to what you need, to be mindful of those things.
Mm-hmm. I had like one more thought or one more question that we haven't really touched on. And that is that, you talked about how we give like a 2 to 3 day bereavement period and then expect people to come back to work, et cetera. But yet at some point, people do need to, I said I was in shock for 7 years. I didn't put my life on hold for 7 years because, obviously you can't do that. So, and I know people who own businesses and something happens and they need to still keep the plate spinning. They need to still keep the business going. So is there a way that people can grieve and still, function day to day? I hope so, because we're not really given a choice, right? We need to be functioning. We can't put our whole career, our whole life on hold indefinitely.
Absolutely. And that's such a great point. When I was giving that metaphor around grief like a river earlier, there are places along the way that we can rest. Sometimes we don't have the energy to fully experience the pain of a memory, or allow ourselves all of the time that would be connected to the feeling or of that loss. And that is okay. If there are specific times and places where you can allow yourself to grieve, it might be that there's a place in your garden that you can sit and connect to. If there is some, outdoor space, it might be a chair next to the window in your bedroom. It might be during your morning meditation. But if there's a sacred time that you can take, that you can make your own and you can connect to, that you can say, this is the time that I can give to this today in this moment, then that's what you need at that time. And allowing that to be okay for you, because that's where you are. And there may be times where it's more or less than that. And again, grief and loss is very individual. So it is going to be according to where you are at that time. And that's perfectly fine. It is, not something where we need to feel this desire to place an end to it quickly. It is, likely for many of us to have those periods where, again, it continues for a long time, and being able to allow ourselves those periods of rest through it is important.
Wow, I'm so glad that we came around to that topic, because it's, I think, a great place to leave the conversation, and so inspiring and kind and gentle. So thank you so much, LaToya. Thank you for everyone here listening. And Again, you can reach out to me at sherikhoff.com. And Latoya, can you give your website one more time?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sheri. My website is mindfulhomeinteriorsnc.com.
Thank you. So have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. And I will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.